Putin was a Chabadnik. He was in the Chabad, and he is in Chabad.
Okay, could you send that article again? Or is it? Uh, there we go. Yeah. All right. Private chats. There we go.
Yeah, just
Okay. Okay. Copy link. That's the way you
Putin
got to
was
do
a
it.
Chabadnik, and oy and he was really lovely, and he's the most symphony Christian of all history.
Okay, so I got that article opened somewhere else real quick. I got this quote here though. That's a trip that I just posted on my thing. It says, "Behind the mask of diplomatic and political cooperation and partnership with the United States and Europe, the current Russian leaders are following the strategy of their predecessors and working towards a new world order. When the right moment comes, the mask will be dropped, and the Russians with the Chinese will help to seek to impose their system on the West on their own terms." Anatoly Golitsyn. Now, this guy was like a former KGB agent who like left the organization or something, and he's got like all this material where he like uh, he sort of like exposes how the majority of their priests were atheist KGB agents during the Khrushchev persecutions in the, I think it was the 60s, uh, moving on up or something like 50s, 60s, something like that. So what I was going to read from is actually this little piece um, about this. Okay, so it's another aspect of the Khrushchev persecution. This is from Vladimir Moss, by the way. So he became so he so called because he was the chief inspirer and strategist of it. Was the infiltration of agents into the ranks of the church. We're talking about the Russian Orthodox Church, the Moscow Patriarchate. Anatoly Golitsyn, who defected from the KGB in 1961, writes, quote, "As a part of the program to destroy the religion from within, the KGB in the 1950s started sending dedicated young communists to ecclesiastical academies and seminaries to train them as future church leaders. These young communists joined the church not at the call of their conscience to serve God, but at the call of the Communist Party in order to serve the party and to implement its general in the struggle against religion. As regards to the ordinary priests, Father Alexander Borisov writes, quote, almost everyone was recruited into the KGB. Myself, I myself was recruited, and I know that our other priest, Father Vladimir, was also recruited. I think those who say that they were not recruited are deceiving us. After all, in the early times, one could not become a bishop without making some compromise. It was simply impossible. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to read from this is from a schema monk, Epiphany Chernov. He says he recounts the following story about a Communist Party member and his wife, who was secretly a member of the Catacomb Church. That means his wife was. When their son was born, she wanted to have him baptized, but not in the Moscow Patriarchate. He then, quote, tried to convince his wife of a truth which she was well aware, but in the given case, the husband's words were very convincing and concrete. So she wants to have the kid baptized. She doesn't want in the Moscow Patriarchate. She doesn't tell him that. He assumes she wants to have him baptized in the Moscow Patriarchate, but she's secretly a member of the Catacomb Church. But this is what he says to her. I guess he was in the KGB. So he goes, "So you have firmly decided to baptize the child?" She says, "Yes, of course." "Well, that's your affair. Only I would like to introduce into the matter a certain correction or rationalization." She says, "Please, I'm listening." "Well, here it is. Tell me, please, have you saved an extra 7 rubles, which you are intending to give our, quote, pope or priest? If they are extra, give them to me. I will drink them away, and I'll baptize the child for you." Tell me what's the difference. Either he'll drink them away or I will. And he and I are absolutely the same, and we will sit next to each other at the party's gathering. Whether you give the child to him to be baptized or to me, we're both atheists. So it'd be better and more humane for you to give the 7 rubles to your atheist husband than to this atheist stranger. And listen, your husband is more righteous and decent than that atheist. After all, he pretends to be a believer, but he's an atheist. Moreover, he pretends so that much that he's even become a priest, while I honorably and in the sight of all am an atheist. But I can baptize our child with the same effect as he. Well, tell me, have I convinced you? While Patriarch Alexis and the Metropolitan Nicholas protested against the persecution, they remain completely loyal to the Soviet power. This is in January 1960. Karpov wrote to the Central Committee, quote, "The Patriarch is completely loyal with regards to authorities, always and not only in official declarations, but also in his entourage. He speaks sincerely and with exaltation about the government and Comrade Khrushchev. The Patriarch does not pay enough attention to work abroad, but even he accepts all our recommendations." So we kind of see there, like, these what was going on was, you had the KGB sending young seminarians who were actually atheistic communists to infiltrate the church. And you can imagine this is the 50s, 60s, right? So where do you think those KGB, seminarians are now? And do people think that ended? Because there's been multiple KGB agents that have come
Well,
out. You know,
I'll tell you. Let's apply the situation to the American situation that we find ourselves in now, right?
right?
Isn't it interesting that the people that are so against this system, like let's just use Tucker Carlson as an easy example, right? Because everybody's dogpiling on him, right?
Okay.
He's the easy example of somebody who supported all the and I'm stealing this from Richard Spencer, who this talking point, but because I'm going to take it even further than he does. But he says something to the effect of like, Tucker Carlson was working for this Jewish guy, Bill Kristol, supporting all the neocon wars, and now we're experiencing all this blowback, all these people getting imported to our country, uh, supposedly because we caused all these wars over there to quote unquote defend ourselves, right? Now we're
Uh-huh.
supposed to trust Tucker Carlson has our interest in mind when he's talking about how bad the government is and how much it hates its people and all this stuff when he was a part of it, right? But here's the
Right.
thing: what if the KGB itself talks against itself? Shouldn't we apply that to here in America? Why
Absolutely.
wouldn't the government here talk against itself to catch you plotting against it? Of course they would. And that's what we see happening, right? They're all just setting bait for us to go and take it and say something illegal, and then they put us in prison or a gulag or worse. That's what I think.
Absolutely.
That's what I think is going to personally.
And it's good. We're seeing a lot of like controlled opposition, and I mean, like people have known that for a while. But initially, well, you have like this sort of naivety here in America, and what or the West, and like what I would say it's sort of like this. It's like NATO liberalism equals evil, so conservatism equals good, or Putin equals good, or Trump equals good. Like just like whatever the antithesis to NATO liberalism is, then that equals good, and there's no nuance to where it can be like, well, both are sort of um, two evil wings of the same bird in a sense, right? It's like they want you to sort of get into a black and white view of issues, so you're stuck in the dialectic, right? Like you're constantly, and that's like church issues too, and like I think that's a big thing, is you'll see microcosms of what's happening on a larger scale within what happens with the Orthodox Church. And it's like a good example because people don't tend to think in this way. But Orthodoxy, especially world Orthodoxy, has become a political institution just like anything else. It's no more about, I mean, if these guys, people will have questions like, why are these priests into ecumenism, and why are they doing these heretical acts? It's because they don't really believe.
Right.
They're
While,
atheists.
while they talk against it, they're also. I mean, and think about it like this: like, why were so many people against the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages or the late Middle Ages or the around the time of the Enlightenment, et cetera, right? Well,
Hmm.
because they had basically become corrupt, but also because they become spy networks, right? They had become king makers and all these other things where, you know what I mean, where, these priests are basically like little popes running around, and they'll tell you what the Bible says, they'll tell you what to do, and then they're taking bribes, they're spying on people, they're probably taking part in assassinations, who knows, right? But
Absolutely.
I'm just saying, like, this is kind of why people turn against the Catholic Church for the right reasons. But now it's, did the Protestant Reformation fix that? I mean, in a sense it did, but it also created new problems of turning
Well,
Christianity
the thing that Protestant, I think that Protestantism gets right in a sense is like it's harder to infiltrate a structure that's not that's sort of I don't know the word. I don't know. It's just like not one conglomerate, not like a street corporation, so or like something where you could just like get to the top level and then influence everything because it's compartmentalized in that way. That's sort of how true orthodoxy is, and that's like an advantage we have, I think, at least about, and I think God gave us that as a way to where us it couldn't be infiltrated so easily. But what's going on, well, at least with the Catholic Church, what we seen was it's like, okay, you got these guys that are taking confessions and using it as a network, and it becomes like a corporation for political control and to put in, kings or whatever, like whatever the church wanted, it would get because of it's a like the first corporation. It has unlimited funds and it can buy off anybody. The problem with that is like, there is a good sort of obedience that was taught by the monks and the saints, and these people were actually religious people and actually were filled with the Spirit of God, and they understood that humility is a good thing. But what happens with like these Machiavellian types, they see something like a good obedience, then they flip it on its head and turn it into blind obedience, where it's like whatever I say you do. And there, we have to have discernment, the difference between the two, because World Orthodox guys will be like, well, you guys are rebelling against the church, and it's like, no, we're not rebelling against the church. You actually are, by following people that are innovators and modernists and introducing these teachings that were never taught by the saints, and depending on these lofty titles that they hold, like archbishop or metropolitan, when they view themselves just like the Catholic Church did, as this like corporation. um, so they'll take something good and sort of like flip it on its head. It's a perversion of true obedience, and that's where the Protestants went overboard. It's like, since these people took advantage of good obedience, then we should have no obedience to all to priest. And that's not what Christ taught. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you read somebody like Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who was a direct disciple of Saint Peter and Saint John, and walked with the apostles themselves, and they say he was even held by Christ as a child. And that's mentioned in the Gospels. I mean, he's not mentioned by name, but that they call him the uh, oh, I forget this name. It's a nickname they gave him. But anyways, he said, "Follow the bishop as you would follow Christ," and people would follow the apostles because they followed Christ. And if someone is truly following Christ, we should follow them, especially if they're giving us the sacraments. But that's easy to subvert, and we've seen that already in the gospel where they're talking about wolves in sheep's clothing. So there's always this danger of people confusing the church organism with the church organization, and not looking at like nuances of a situation. I guess like it's definitely difficult to. But I think that's why we kind of not to, like keep rambling, but like have to pray for discernment. You know.
Right. And a lot of it comes down to, and again, like I say this from an outsider perspective because I'm not in the Orthodox Church, but my whole life I've just observed it. It's a lot of spiritual laziness or sloth, right? Where there's just no vigilance, there's no like discern, and there's I mean, I don't, I want to give people in the, some Protestants in the South at least that I knew, like, some credit. Like, there was some level of suspicion about certain things that occurred, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I mean, I think it's one of those things where like a lot of it was kind of built on like false foundations, and so I guess the way I would portray it is like a lot of people just don't know their history, I guess, and so when someone doesn't know their history, then it's very easy to take advantage of that. And
Well, they reject,
yeah,
they were right to reject, the rationalism of the Enlightenment, right? But they take it too far. I think it's like it's it's sort of like the same thing with this dialectic between NATO liberalism and Putin communism, or something like that. It's like, well, since one is evil, then this obviously has to be the answer. It's like we can't have any priests, and we got to take all the icons off the walls, and there can be no depiction of Christ. And the first 1,000 years of Christianity, those people were just out of their minds. They didn't know anything. And that's wrong too. You know what I mean? It's like there has to be some type of balance between, so you don't overreact, right? And I think a lot of times it's an overreaction, and sometimes it's directly meant to be an overreaction. Like the people that are pushing it, like the Luthers, me and Rashim are talking about it. Like Luther talks about the Kabbalah, and it's almost like save becomes a magic formula. Like you say, all you have to say is, Lord Jesus Christ, I accept you in my heart, and then you're saved. So you do X and you get Y, right? And like if we look in the New Testament teaching on salvation, there's 5 different Greek words for it, and none of them match up with that type of understanding of salvation. Like it's like the way that it was, I figured it out, or like was told about it, is that it's like the life preserver's throne, the life preserver's Christ, and we're not saved until the ship reaches the shore. And that makes sense when you read the gospel, when it talks about Christ separating the sheep and the goats when he comes back. So it's like, if we're saved, why is he judging when he comes back, right?
right. Well, and it's kind of like that. I remember "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" was like a big thing, which is not really a Christian movie, but there was some song in there where it's like God's golden shores, and I think it's kind of what you're saying. Like, first step is when you die, and second is when he comes back, right? And so that's why they kind of mess with all these things about you're saved, you're once saved, always saved, and also they mess with like the eschatology a lot, right? And I think it's because those two things are crucial to Christianity, and so if you mess with those two things, it kind of throws everything else out of whack.
Absolutely. And it's like, yeah, I think that Luther was correct in his rejection of the Catholic Church, because they were adding indulgences and doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. But it's like he takes it to the extreme again, right? It's like the early Protestant reformers did go to Orthodoxy and ask them what they should do, right? And there was Greek guys, I forget specifically, but I think there was a few Greeks that like responded to them, and they had dialogue with them. And what they told the reformers was that they needed to go back to, the church of the first 1,000 years prior to the Roman Catholic.
Right, and you kind of saw some of that with the Anglicans. Like, I think they kind of tried to do that, but then you can see that got, obviously, that turned into like a British spy system or whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely, it
you
did.
know,
Yeah, and like the whole Anglican stuff too. If you look like in the early 1920s with Meliotius Montekis, his big thing was bringing the Anglicans in, and this was, he was a spy for England. Meliotius Montekis was, and like his whole thing was bringing the Angelicans into Orthodoxy, like being a sister church, and that you could go to an Anglican priest and an Orthodox priest, and it didn't really matter, you know. And then that led to like lifting the anathemas against the Roman Catholics. So it's like once you give in to I and like Saint Justin Popovic brings up this point about Protestantism. It's like once the Pope declares himself infallible, one man sees himself as infallible, it leads to all men seeing themselves as infallible. So Protestants become their own little popes, right? It's like that's how it ends up happening without them realizing it. It's like, well, we're not going to follow this one guy's word for it. We're going to just trust what we think, you know, and that becomes there, you know. And in the gospel, it talks about there's no private interpretation, and like, what does that mean? It's like somebody who isn't in the consensus of what has always been taught can't just come up and interpret the scriptures any way they want to. And if you look in the Bible, especially what Satan did in the when he was in the desert with Christ, after Christ fasts for 40 days and 40 nights, Satan comes to him and he starts listing off scriptures. Like if he's like, if turn this rock into bread or something, and Christ tells him man can't live off bread alone. So he's like taking bits and pieces of the scripture and interpreting them the wrong way, and then Christ is interpreting them correct way, and it nullifies what Satan's trying to push to him. So I don't think people realize this, but all these misinterpretations of the scripture are rooted in a satanic mindset, right? That's Satan doing that. That's Satan subverting the minds of men unconsciously, you know. And it's not always like just like a demon whispering to men. I think men have reached a point where we think like demons, and why? It's like it's almost like we're being influenced by spiritual forces around us through people, through entertainment, through different things. We don't realize how much influence the world has on our thinking, and how much Satan has on the thinking of men of this modern world. I mean, it's his, really. I mean, it's not really his. Once Christ, it's God owns this world, and after the resurrection, he defeated the devil, and in truth, this world is his. But the ways the world are not of Christ. That's the distinction, I think. Let me see. Let's see what we got here. So I got this paper. This is Rockefeller, Nelson A. Rockefeller, and it's called Federalism and the Free World Order. And it's from a newspaper article for May 1962. And it's called The Future of Federalism, Federalism and the Free World Order. He was the governor of New York, Nelson A. Rockefeller. With this, we begin a substitutional condescension of Governor Rockefeller's three Godkin lectures at Harvard University on the future of federalism. We start with the third, given February 9th, for its topic is the most immediate interest to our readers. The first two make no less a contribution to the domestic side of federalism, and will appear in the later issues. Editor. Okay, so he starts. Let's see. This is interesting because this is kind of like very early New World Order plan setting in the United States. He says, I dedicated this final lecture to one of the basic propositions. It is this: the federal idea, which our founding fathers applied in their historic act of political creation in the 18th century, can be applied to this 20th century in the largest context, the world of free nations, if we will but match our forefathers in courage and vision. The first historic instance secured freedom and order to this new nation. The second can decisively serve to guard freedom and to promote order in the free world. Sweeping as this assertion may be, I believe it be anything but an academic proposition. Quite the contrary, it is a matter of cold political realism. For the realities before us, the erosion of the world order and the peril to the world freedom, persist challenges of a size and of a greatness never before known. They cannot be met by defensive devices, mere tactical maneuvers, or the most cunningly contrived improvisations. Political creation, not improvisation, is the order of the day, and any less than a grand design, a major idea, and a lofty sense of purpose. It is too puny for the time in which we live. Of all times in our history, this would be the most inconceivably in which to dismiss or to disparage any true creative political concept as too bold or too large or to meet the challenges of the hour. So he's pushing globalism right now, and then he's like, the old system is bumpkin and puny, and it's not going to work in our modern world, and we kind of need this new world order to survive. That's kind of what he's saying right now, I think. So he's like, the essence of the global crisis of this mid 20th century is the urgent need and quest in the world of free nations. So it's like selling you freedom with this idea, but in reality, it's like, you know, um, in order to have free nations, we need to have a global control grid. Like what? Um, for the answer to this question, how can free men guard and foster freedom, diversity, and progress within a framework of order and unity? So here again, we have like this myth of progress being pushed. The free world, in short, is grappling with the precisely the political equation, the elements of order and factors of freedom, whose balancing has been the supreme political advancement of our nation's history. Since World War II, we have obviously looked beyond the purely national horizon of this attachment to our new role in the world. In this role, we have done much to recognize our military responsibility in the cause of freedom. We also have done much to employ our economic power as an essential source of strength and progress for all free nations. But we have failed to face up to the fundamental political problem, the creation of a free world structure of order and unity. New political framework needed. We must do what we must do is to provide that political leadership essential to build a framework within the basic and urgent aspirations of free men and free nations can be realized. And we can begin this historic task by recognizing the political relevance of the federal idea to the destiny of the free world as a whole. This, I believe, quickly becomes clear from a review of the deterioration of structures for political order in the world. Let us look at a few plain facts. First, no nation today can defend its freedom or fulfill the needs and aspirations of its own people from within its own borders or through its own resources alone. Military defense, economic growth, rising living standards, widening opportunities for individual fulfillment, all these prime essentials of modern life for free men require the joint and cooperative actions of many sovereignties. So that's what does that sound like? Okay, so nation state is obsolete. Okay, so now he's going to talk about how the nation state is obsolete, and so the nation state standing alone threatens in many ways to seem as an anachronistic wait anachronistic as the Greek city-state eventually became in ancient times. Second, the old pattern and formulas of international order have been shattered. The European empires, whatever their inequities, did provide frameworks within which diverse and distant people could live and work together. Today, virtually all these structures have disintegrated, leaving a historical political vacuum. Third, the UN repository of so much hope that has been able not nor can it provide to shape a new world order, which events now so compellingly command. The structure of the UN is such that it could function effectively only as there is essential agreement on the purpose and procedure among the five permanent members of the Security Council. The Communist bloc has dedicated itself to the manipulation of the UN's democratic process so astutely and detrimentally as largely to frustrate its intended power and role. As a result, the UN lacks the strength to master or control the forces that it confronts. So, what I think he's talking about is that the communists would do things like pit, sort of um, allies against each other by false narratives. Like they would be like, oh, France said this about you, United States, or did this, and they're actually like spying on you guys or whatever. And like, that whole thing was about causing dissent, and they've done it up into NATO. Like I posted that video, and it's like, what is communism's biggest fear is, I guess the United States doing what they plan on doing, which is have a new world order where everybody is sort of under one umbrella. So it's like they're all fighting for the same purpose. Now, it's like who can be the first to obtain, world domination or something. That's like the what's really going on is what we're seeing here is uh, who can be the first. So either side of it, no matter who you're gonna pick in this war of the world, I guess, they all have the same goal, and we're sort of just pawns in their game. Um, the communist bloc. Okay, as a result, the UN lacks the strength to master or control the forces that it confronts. The enduring value of the UN is threefold: as the universal system of humanity's hope for peace, as a form of voicing and hearing all the divisions and basic conflicts that imperil these hopes, and as a channel for daily communication between nations. Okay, so he goes on. Fourth, the ultimate challenge of the communist imperialism is its promise to fill the political vacuum in world order created by the collapse of old empires and the failures of anything else to take their place. Such a vacuum is abhorrent to politics as to nature, and communism offers a cruel design for world order. So we have a globalist here. What they do, and this is always strategic. The communists are talking about the globalists, and the globalists are talking about the communists, and they're both downing each other and talking about how, like, they're both, this is satanic and evil. All the while, they have their own evil scheme to sort of get you stuck in that dialectic. It seeks to create the illusion that a communist world order will be more secure, more rational, or more geared to the realities of modern life, science, and technology than any other structure, past or present. This communist new order is based on a false federalism, whose pattern may be found in the Soviet Union itself. So he's pushing for federalism, okay, while saying this is false federalism. But they're both false. It's insanity. The Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics has outward signs of a federalist structure, as its very name implies. So let's look at this word federalist. I think that'd be kind of important to do, because I'm not necessarily sure what he means by federalist. Uh, let's look. Federalism definition. Federalism is a system of government where power is divided between a national federal government and regional state governments. Both levels of government operate within the same territory, but each has its own sphere of authority and can make laws and policies. Federalism involves a written constitution that clearly defines the powers and responsibilities of both the federal and state governments. Both levels of government have some degree of autonomy and authority within their designed areas. Examples in the U.S. The U.S. Constitution outlines specific powers for the federal government, like declaring war, regulating interstate commerce, and reserves to power to the states, like establishing schools and regulating marriage. Quote,
Make,
dual
make,
sovereignty.
make
Go
sure
ahead.
you look up the difference between that and confederacy, because America was originally intended to be a confederacy, which they got from the natives, which I'm a big advocate for, right? So when the South called themselves Confederates, it's because they were against federalism, right? So I think that's
Right.
important.
Okay. So that's a good point to make. But I think what I've learned about all this, right, and I'm not downing, because I think that there were really good people within the, the Confederacy that didn't weren't as, I guess, negatively. They don't match up to what the historical narrative is. Let's just put it that way, right? I think the problem with our our system itself is that it kind of formed out of a rebellion, right? And it's like we're rebelling, and it's like I'm not putting down the fact that the rebellion was good in a sense. And what I mean by this is like we're rebelling against the England, right? The crown, the monarchy over there that wants to like tax us and do all this stuff that's wrong. So it's like we're going to do our own thing. But what ends up happening in that situation is like after a revolution, you know, and like instead of this is what I think we should have done. Instead of doing away, I think we went to an extreme, and what ends up happening with an extreme, it's directed towards anarchy. No matter what we do, because we're based in this revolutionary spirit, and I'm not, there's a lot of virtue in it, right? But sometimes what appears to be good is actually directed towards chaos and evil.
Well, yes, and I sorry to interrupt you, but just do me the favor if you can and look up that definition, and then also remember that the Ludwell, like the Buck Johnsons and the Jim Jatras and all these other guys, they're using that same argumentation to say that essentially that Americans were a bunch of godless heathens going against their king and church.
Right.
Which yes, that's true, but at the same time, it's like, uh, you know, so it's kind of it's a very precarious thing, right? Because that's why I say like the history is really important, because that's kind of how they're selling it to Americans, which is not going to work because Americans generally think of themselves like, we were basically German and British people. But the trick is that, so what are they doing to America simultaneously? They're making us a quote unquote melting pot of just people who don't even care about Christianity whatsoever, right? And
Right.
again,
That's true.
whether Christianity in America was always corrupt or not is kind of besides the point. The point is that why are they using people of a different faith or ethnicity or whatever as weapons against white Anglo Christians? Because white Anglo Christians kind of have some sort of historical involvement in this very thing that we're talking about, right? And I think that they're trying to get rid of that, just like they did with Russia, right? So what they did 100 years ago in Russia, they're doing today in America, in my personal opinion, right?
No, you're right. But and this is what I guess my point is like that. This is where I think I take it a different direction, right? It's like what I think should have happened with America to be in the good graces of God, because that's the way I'm basing my thought process on, right? It's like it, initially our plan was to succeed from these oppressive monarchs that were using the monarchy as a form of control and a blind obedience towards you know the monarchy in England. Like it's like we're God on earth instead of the monarch being a proper monarch. And what I mean by that is like the monarch is following the church and is charismated by the church and it is truly a spiritual person. Like with the last guy we seen was Tsar Nicholas II, and they killed the guy and threw him out and killed his family. Like, you know what I mean, and set up, a revolutionary government. We didn't take that route. We sort of succeeded from them, and then we set up, a democracy where the limbs sort of control the head. And in a sense, it's always going to be directed towards some form of lawlessness. And I'm not saying that these people were evil
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely
exactly,
right. Yeah, 100%.
but
You're right.
but
Yeah.
it's like all this, our whole political system is based on, sort of the age of reason, like Enlightenment concepts. Like that's,
Right.
that's just
Which was basically a neo-Gnostic Jewish,
right. Like
conspiracy essentially. Yeah.
Voltaire and those type of guys, right? And Hobbes and like that type of thinking permeated within the revolutionary spirit. And that revolutionary spirit, I believe, is the spirit of Lucifer, or the Antichrist spirit that's talked about in the gospel. It talks about lawlessness.
Right.
And it's like that same lawlessness, we see it in like rock music or anything else. It's like we have this rebellious spirit about us. And like there's a sense where rebellion, if you're rebelling against evil, that's a good thing to rebel against, right? But it becomes this thing where we're even rebelling against good and God, in our rebellion against evil. It's like we take it to the extreme and rebel against everything, and then try to set up, some form of structure out of this rebellion. And then when it's like sort of gets taken advantage of, which I think that was always the plan by, like, I guess, like, Adam Weishaupt and all these other people. It's like, we're going to cause a revolution. And then once we cause the revolution, we're going to, set up this democracy against the king, against the monarch, who was probably like an evil bastard, but then we're going to be just as evil, but more conspicuous about our evil.
Well, if you ever see that, I think that's kind of what Shakespeare was writing about too. If you really think about what was Shakespeare talking about, I'm thinking specifically of Macbeth, but I'm sure you could apply it to like, you know, uh, King Lear or other things I didn't really look into that much. But I know Macbeth is kind of like that, and also like Monty Python kind of did some skits about. I think that's kind of what Monty Python and the Holy Grail was kind of about in a sense, but also. Life of Brian was basically kind of like a Gnostic interpretation of Christianity, right? And
Right.
what do you call it? Or maybe not a Gnostic, but you know what I mean. It's like some sort of like Jewish, whatever. And then
Like
the other,
satirical comedy against Christ, and
right?
something, right?
Or at the very least, it may have been trying to critique, it may have been trying to like critique, the Jewish infiltration of Christianity. But either way, it's like
Which
it's
is true.
yeah.
That's absolutely true that is going on. And I think that's what Protestantism was. And then you add like elements of like the spiritualism movement that led to like the charismatic revival or whatever. I guess my point though is like, when we're reading them, like if you read the gospel, when it's talking about you can't serve two masters, like God and mammon. I think what the world is constantly trying to get us to do, like Christ said, it's like give to Caesar's what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. It's not that we're like rebelling, or we should rebel at towards our government. We're in the situation that they're in. I don't want Orthodox Christians
Well,
out here to
well,
think like,
at the very least, you have to pick your battles wisely, right? Like he's basically saying, like like you're gonna, what are you gonna do? You're gonna go protest tax for what? Like you know what I mean?
right,
Like there's many different ways. I think
like
it
that
was
whole
intended. Yeah.
sovereign citizen movement. I think that's stupid. You know what I mean? It's like you could
Well,
be
it's
right.
it's it's political Luciferianism essentially is what I mean. That's basically what it was.
Right. It's like you could be right to a certain degree on these things, but who cares? Because once you take it to court, man, they don't care.
Well, and me and
It's a waste
Machine
of
were kind of
time.
talking about that yesterday, where like this idea of property kind of like snuck its way in, and then because the thing is like See, like that's kind of where Marxism was correct because they were kind of critiquing this idea of property. But the problem is, like in a Luciferian sense, it also kind of like says, well, no one owns your body. Well, what that's kind of means like you can't be killed because you don't own your own body. You can't be arred because you don't own your own body. You know what I mean? So they take two extremes, right? Because they don't
Right.
want you to look in the middle path. That's kind of what I'm trying to get
And
at.
what Christianity is that middle path, I think. It's that royal path. Because what communism does is it'll take like a Christian concept, like, okay, like we all, if we're a Christian community, we should help each other and, look out for your neighbor. And then they like, put that in a prepackaged box for the cause of communism. And then you got things like communist Christianity that comes out of it, where they're like, Stalin was a Christian and Putin's a Christian. And it's like, really? Like, are they really about Christ, or is it about,
Well, I mean, you could you could try to make the argument like, well, they're just a man and they're put in a position they have to act. That's one thing, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then on the other side, they're trying to glorify it, like that's who we should emulate. It's like, or just get right behind him and follow him into battle or something. I mean, you know what I mean? Like both
Right.
ways, it kind of doesn't work, right? Like you could just say, well, he's a man in the arena or whatever, whatever they try to say. That's what Alex Jones says all the time. Oh, you're just a man in the arena. It's like, yeah, but I mean, how many millions of people have been killed in the name of like, tally ho, let's go fight all the people on the other side and, glorify it. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like a blood sacrifice ritual or something.
Absolutely. I think that is what that is. I think that demons inspire people, because you look at the Old Testament and what was, the sacrifice for the sins of the Jays. It's like you would sacrifice the blood of an animal to cover your own
Exactly.
sin,
No, that's
right?
and that's exactly how I think Christians and Muslims are being viewed at on the quote unquote chessboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got black and you got white, and you pit them against each other, and then you use them, and then you kind of put their sins on you on the. I mean, you put your sins on them, and then when they take it upon themselves to go and act out this ritual or what of war,
Yeah.
you're kind of forgiven, right? And again, I know that sounds crazy, but this
No,
is how
because
like
it is
the
exactly
Jews
that.
talk. This is how the Jews talk about it. They talk about it where they say like, well, and actually Jay Dyer said this the other day. He said, well, Christianity, we account for sacrifice, but Islam is like totally lawless. They have no sacrifice accounted for. And again, he doesn't talk about what the Jewish people think of it, at least in modern times, where they think of like putting your sins on other things and scapegoating it as basically a satanic like inversion of what we're talking about, right? So
Yeah. So let's go there. Let's go to that point. Um. So the Zionist leaders of the Western world saw H's rise to power and the implementation of his bloodthirsty plans as an opportunity to unite the Jays in the struggle for the establishment of the Zionist state on the lands belonging to the Arab people. As early as the end of the 19th century, in the depths of the Jayist political sects, a bloodthirsty plan was hatched, according to which a significant part of the Jayish people became hostages in the hands of their Talmudic conspirators against humanity. Ordinary Jays were destined to play the role of material, sacrificial meat, in the struggle of the Zionist leaders for power over the world. At one of the Zionist meetings, it was bluntly stated, quote, if our plans are not fulfilled by means of financial influence, then we must push our people to the greatest suffering in order to unite them. As well as Kabbalist M. Lotman later stated, quote, since our people are not very inclined to choose the path of the Torah, the Creator pushes us to accept this path through suffering. By sending us the Holocaust, He brought us back to Eretz Israel and gave us this land. On the basis of this ideology, the Zionist leaders decided to make H their instrument for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. As the German journalist G. Horn wrote, quote, the Zionists perceived the establishment of the ends in, those people in Germany, not as a national catastrophe, but as a unique historical opportunity for the realization of Zionist intentions. As soon as the Zionists and National Socialists elevated race and nation to the scale of all things, it was inevitably that a common bridge would arise between them. So, it says in the 1963, the catalog of papers, the microfilms, and the documents of the ministry archives was published in the United States. Foreign Affairs of Germany, from which it followed that having come to power, the leadership of the Third Reich entered into a direct agreement with the Zionists. In his book, quote, The Other Side of the Coin, published in the United States, the Jewish leader A. Lilienthal noted that, quote, in the first months of the existence of H's regime, the Zionists were the only representatives of Jays who dealt with the German authorities, and they used their position to discredit the anti-Zionists and Jays who advocated assimilation. As a result, an agreement was reached between the Jewish agency and the Nazi authorities, who promised to help the immigration, and the assistance was given provided by the Gestapo and the SS. Okay, so, sort of what you're talking about there, like this sacrifice to the demons, like that's the way they're viewing it. It's like you have to crack eggs to make an omelet. I think that's really like what it's all about. It's like if we crack these particular eggs, the ends justify the means. And although we're complicit in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, the world is going, economically, those people that are survived the genocide are going to be in a much better position, after the sacrifice. And it's like we've pleased the demon gods with the blood of men, like we've reached a point to where now we will thrive. And it's an old concept, it's like a Moloch type concept. It's like beat the drums and throw your kids in the fire and, you'll get rain. But I mean, it's psychotic, it's and it's trying to achieve an earthly paradise, built on the backs of death and blood and murder. It's crazy, really.
So I was looking at something earlier today about like dominionism. Have you ever heard of that before?
No, let's talk about it.
Do me a favor. Google that. Just write in dominionism Christianity, and then just
Okay.
click on the Wikipedia and read the first couple paragraphs. It'll blow your mind.
Okay. All right. Dominionism, Christianity. Boop, boop. Okay. Dominion theology, also known as dominionism, is a group of far-right Christian political ideologies that seek to institute a nation governed by Christians and based on their understanding of biblical law. Extents of rule and ways of acquiring governing authority are varied. For example, dominion theology can include theonomy, but does not necessarily involve advocating of adherence to the Mosaic law as the basis of government. The label is primarily applied to groups of Christians in the United States. Prominent adherents of those ideologies include Calvinist Christian Reconstructionism, Charismatic and Pentecostal Kingdom Now theology, and New Apostolic Reformation. So it seems like the New Age movement is sort of behind this, and
Yeah.
having a Christian mask over it or something.
But then when you keep reading it, she talks about how the Catholics are involved, but they try to
Right? Yeah, I
deny
see
it
that.
essentially. Yep.
Most of the contemporary movements that are labeled dominion theology arose in the 1970s from religious movements asserting aspects of Christian nationalism. Roman Catholic integralism is also sometimes considered to fall under the dominionist umbrella, but the Catholic integralist movement is much older and theologically more different from Protestant dominionism, since it decided to introduce that the Catholic Church is the only true church. What's kind of interesting about what this right here is, I was watching this documentary on the Jesuits, and it was talking about all these, I guess, these Protestant pastors, like Billy Graham and, name the guy, kind of, like John Hagee or whatever, like that they were really Jesuits in disguise, you know what I mean, as
Well,
Protestant.
that makes a lot more sense now, doesn't it? So then you think about you kind of look at it from that angle and like, why is the Groypers and uh, you know Nick Fuentes and all these online people who are like pushing this like race war connected to the Knights Templar or the Catholic Church, right?
Right. And that's something interesting. Is like what this documentary is talking about is that the Jesuits and the Black Pope were sort of like the leaders of this culmination of secret societies. So like the Freemasons were subservient to them, and you name it. You know what I mean? Like the Zionists are actually subservient, or they're working together in some way with the Jesuits, and if you look into the history on this, what I think actually happened is you go to something like, let's say, Pope Innocent III, and this is where, like, I talked to a Templar about this before, and there was Jewish Gnostic sages at that time that were going to Pope Innocent and showing him Kabbalistic, doctrines that sort of became like Christian Kabbalah or something like that, right? Like the Catholic Church sort of took this stuff, and the Jesuits, of course, they discovered the electromagnetic light spectrum, studying the Kabbalah,
Right, right,
and it's
exactly.
like,
And where did Protestantism come out of? It came out of Rosicrucian, Paracelsian,
right,
like John Dee, all this fucking Enochian magic, whatever the fuck, you know what I mean? So sorry for
right,
the language, but
you know.
there you go.
So that's the connection there, and it's like, what's going on there? It's like, okay, you have an upper echelon of this. They're clearly heretical according to Orthodoxy. Like if you read, like, anybody like who really cares and wants to know, like, how did the early Christians sort of view the Roman Catholic Church when it started to subvert and like deter from Christianity in the first 1,000 years? You go to like Saint Mark of Ephesus on Florence and read what he said. They cut his tongue out and like banned him, I think. You know what I mean? Like from speaking, they put him in a jail cell and then like sent him to some island. Like the Greeks wanted help because they were being attacked by the Turks. So they were willing to compromise with the Roman Catholics for money, and Saint Mark wasn't. And he was like, if anybody even, if anybody that's even associated, it was like early ecumenism, where it was like these patriarchs are like willing to take bribes from the Roman Catholic Church or money from them, and they'll accept their heresy documents. You know what I'm saying? Like heretical documents. And St. Mark just destroys them. And they banned him from speaking. But the more you look at that, you realize how much heresy had actually infiltrated them. And I believe at the upper echelon of them, they were Kabbalists. That's what Freemasonry is all about. And I think that's where all the whole basis of Freemasonry is. It's just, it's a Jesuit sort of invention. You look at Weishaupt, like he was directly influenced by the Jesuits when he formed the Illuminati, which is another subset, of the same type of um, structure, And you look at Anton LaVey's book on satanic rituals, he talks about, that these organizations sort of having the appearance of Christianity, but really being, a satanic, uh, an organization with Christian trappings to sort of get guys in there. So they pass it off. It's like, we're just a charity. It's like, oh, that's the public relations, and that's what they tell you. But, once you get to the higher degrees of this thing, it's like they're very adamant that they hate the God of the Bible, and they think that Lucifer gave them freedom. Who cares if Satan rules the world? You will on Judgment Day, brother. But yeah, so let's see. Let's go to something else. I got something else here. We're gonna go to. Let's see. All right, so this is a paper by Vladimir Moss, and it is called Globalization and the New World Order and Orthodox Christians' Perspective. Okay, so he says the real victor in 1989, writes Mark Mazalor, quote, was not democracy but capitalism. But it was a new kind of capitalism, globalization. Not that globalization was really new. As Peter Frankopan writes, quote, we think of globalization as a uniquely modern phenomenon, yet 2,000 years ago, too, it was a fact of life, one that presented opportunities, created problems, and prompted technological advancement. 2 millennia ago, uh, silks made by hand in China were being worn by the rich and powerful in Carthage and other cities in the Mediterranean, while pottery manufactured in southern France could be found in Europe and in the Persian Gulf. Spices and condiments grown in India are being used in the kitchens of Xinjiang, and they were in those of Rome. Buildings in the northern Afghanistan carried inscriptions in Greek, while horses from Central Asia were being ridden proudly thousands of miles away in the east. What was new after 1989 was the width and depth of the new wave of globalization that had begun in the 1950s under the aegis. Uh, I think that's how you say that. Aegis, right? Of America and became consolidated after the victory of America, the world's only remaining superpower. In 1989 through 91, enabling Eastern Europe and other formerly communist regions to take part in formerly forbidden delights. During the Cold War, there had been two very different worlds, capitalism and communism. A third world that swayed from one side to the other. By the end of the millennium, there was essentially only one world, the world of globalization. Even Russia and China became partially globalized. Only North Korea and to some extent Iran remain outside the new global civilization. I believe, wrote Thomas L. Friedman, quote, that if you want to understand the post-Cold War world, you have to start by understanding that a new international system has succeeded it, globalization. This is the one big thing people should focus on today. But to the extent that there is a North Star and a worldwide shaping force, it is this system. What is new is the system. What is old is political power politics, chaos, clashing civilizations, and liberalism. And what is the drama of the post-World War world is the interaction between this new system and the old passions. This was an exaggeration. The old world was by no means dead, neither its, quote, passions, nor its political structures. But there can be no more argument about the importance of globalization. The question is, what is it? Investopedia defines globalization as the, quote, the tendency of investment funds and businesses to move beyond the domestic and national markets to other markets around the globe, thereby increasing the interconnection of the world. Globalization has had the effect of uh, markedly increasing international trade and cultural exchange, but it has eroded the power of national governments and increased those of multinational corporations. 150 MNCs now control two-thirds of the world economy. If national governments do not cooperate in the MNCs and the globalization process, they risk seeing factories and jobs removed to others, wage paying countries. This causes unemployment in some industries and therefore social unrest. So they got sort of a gun to the head of these multinational corporations have a gun to the head to our system, really. It's like, if you don't do what we say, then we'll remove these jobs, and this will cause unemployment and social unrest. Moreover, the wide trade liberalization may provide comparative advantage, especially in a period when tariffs are initially high, as in the post-World War period. It's quite another matter with financial liberalization. For as Mauswer writes, quote, the globalization of financial makes it increasingly difficult for nation states to preserve autonomy of actions. Yet markets, as a series of panics and crashes generate their own irrationalities and social tensions. The globalization of labor, too, challenges prevailing definitions of national citizenship, culture, and tradition. End quote. While true globalists welcome these tensions and disruptions as creating the perceived need for a world government, the short-term consequences are undoubtedly bad. Thus, Danny Roderick writes in 2018, quote, perhaps the hyper-globalizers must eager, I don't know how to say that word, Egregious, Ergius, mistake, eager, eagerness, that's how you say that. After the 1990s to formulate financial globalization, they took the textbook argument and ran amok with it. Free flow of finance across the world it was confidently precedented, set money to work where it could do most good. With free flowing capital, savings would be automatically channeled to countries with higher returns, with access to the world markets. Economies and entrepreneurs would have access to more dependable finance. And ordinary individual savers would benefit too, as they'd no longer be compelled to put all their eggs in one national basket. Quote, these gains by and large simply never materialized. Sometimes the effect was the opposite of what was promised. China became an exporter of capital rather than an importer of it, which is what the theory implied young and poor countries should be. Loosening the chains of finance produced a string of extremely costly financial crises, that including that in East Asia in 1997. There is at best a weak correlation between opening up to foreign finance and economic growth, but there is a strong empirical association between financial globalization and financial crisis over time, as there has been since the 19th century, when freely moving international capital would flow with gusto into the Argentinian railways, or some far-flung corner of the British Empire one minute, only to flee away from it in the next. Quote, modern financial globalization went further in the Eurozone. Monetary unification aimed at completely financial integration by removing all transaction costs associated with national borders. The introduction of the euro in 1999 did indeed drive down risk premiums in countries such as Greece, Spain, and Portugal, as borrowing costs converged. But what was the effect? To enable borrowers to run large current account deficits and accumulate problematic amounts of external debt. Money flowed in those parts of the debtor economies that couldn't be traded across borders, above all construction, at the expense of the tradable activities. Credit booms eventually turned into the inevitable bust and sustained slumps in Greece, Spain, and Portugal. Ireland followed amid the global credit crunch. Quote, today, the economics profession's views on the financial globalization are missed at best. It is well understood that markets and government failures, asymmetric information, bank runs, excess volatility, inadequate, inadequate regulation are endemic to the financial markets. Globalization often accentuates these failures. Indeed, in 1997, East Asian crisis, those economies that kept more control of foreign capital survived with less damage. In sum, unconditional openness to foreign finance is hardly ever a good idea. Globalization has both pros and cons. Samuel Huntington made an important distinction between two different things that were becoming global: modernization and westernization. Globalization is the sense of the modernization and integration of the whole world is not evil in itself, or could even work to the furtherance of the good, but not only economic good in certain circumstances. If, for example, the true faith could be preached globally, using global means of communication, as it was in the time of the apostles, thus would the Lord's prophecy be fulfilled. Quote, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Matthew 24 and 14. What is evil is the globalization of westernization, the spreading of the apostate culture of the Western world. It is easy to see that a global republic or a kingdom would have no place in it for orthodoxy except a kind of cultural museum, an exhibition of Eastern European folklore, and could very quickly turn the propaganda of freedom into the reality of a tyranny that could be worse than any that had gone before it. Opinions on globalization are thus sharply divided. Indeed, the debate between the globalists and the anti-globalists is probably the sharpest debate in contemporary world. Christians tend to believe that since the Tower of Babel, different languages and nations have been created by God to slow down the spread of evil and a refuge against it. For atheist globalist individual sovereign nations are the evil. Globalization leads Globalization leads logically to the demand for a world government that will regulate the process of globalization, facilitating it and removing the supposed obstacles of the prosperity of the global communities, such a global warming or the spread of pandemic or overpopulation. There is no longer any secret about the fact that many of the world's richest and most powerful men are working towards a world government. This was being spoken about openly already by Bush and Gorbachev at the end of the Cold War. They saw it as a natural product of the new international situation brought about by the perestroika and the end of the Cold War. Perestroika. Um, Bush went further, using what for many was a code word for something more sinister. Quote, the New World Order. For Bush, this appeared to refer to the rule of international law, administered by the United Nations in close cooperation with the United States as the world's only surviving superpower, and executed most successfully by International Alliance, assembled for Operation Desert Storm against Saddam Hussein. It was based on several presuppositions that were fulfilled briefly under Bush Sr., but not fulfilled under his son, Bush Jr. These included the willingness of the non democratic members of the Security Council, Russia and China, to cooperate with the consensus of the other nations and not apply their vetoes. As time passed, this willingness disappeared. By 2003, even Western members of the Council, such as France, refused to cooperate. The willingness of the United States never to take the initiative in overseas military operations without the agreement of the United Nations. This had disappeared under Bush Jr., whose neocon government was openly contemptuous of the United Nations. The willingness of the United States to act solely in the interests of the quote international community and of the population of those countries, subject to invasion, not in order to promote its own interests, political, military, or economic. This was not the case in 2003, when the interests of the Iraqi people as a whole were scarcely considered, while the interests of the American big corporations, such as Halliburton, played a major role. 4. The willingness of the United States not to obey the wishes of the Israelis unconditionally. Thus, Bush Sr., quote, enraged the Israel lobby during the Gulf War by pressuring Israel not to respond to Iraq's missile attacks, choosing not to occupy Baghdad, and promising American Arab allies that the U.S. would push Israel on the Palestinian issue. President Bush's reference to a, quote, New World Order was rich in connotations for conspiracy theorists who had seen in his phrase the code name for an age-old conspiracy at world domination, going back to Weishaupt's Illuminati of the late 18th century. Thus, Mike Hansen writes, quote, many believe that a powerful group of Illuminati Freemasons manipulated and won the War of Independence in 1776, and this took control of the new United States of America. They believe that this secret brotherhood has never conceded that control to this day. It is interesting to note that the design for the Great Seal of the United States, which contains the magical symbols dating to ancient Egypt and beyond, including the pyramid and the all-seeing eye of Horus, and above and below this symbol are two Latin phrases, Annuit Capotis, uh, uh, Coeptus, and Novus Ordo Seclorum. These translate as announcing the birth, creation of arrival of a, quote, secular, non-religious new order of ages. In other words, they are announcing the creation of the New World Order. Quote, the founding of the United States was a massive step in the plan for centralized global power. Today, this part of the Great Seal can be found on the back of every U.S. dollar bill, which seems appropriate given the secret brotherhood controls the American economy. The decision to put the pyramid and the Novus Ordo Seclorum symbol on the dollar was made by the 33rd degree Freemason, Franklin D. Roosevelt, in 1935, with the full support and encouragement of his vice president, Henry Wallace, another 33rd degree Mason. The American flag was also designed to reflect brotherhood symbolism, and the Statue of Liberty, representing ISIS, was given to American Freemasons by the French Grand Orient Illuminati Masonic Order. Today, the secret brotherhood's conspiratorial network includes the mysterious Bilderberg Group, Yale University's prestigious Skull and Bone Society, the clandestine Black Lodges of Freemasonry, and the Secret Knights of Malta. Its diabolical influences reaches into the corridors of power of the White House, the CIA, the Federal Reserve, and even the Vatican. End quote. Quote, according to Neil Wilgus, in the Illuminati, George Washington has read John Robinson's Proofs of Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried out in the secret meetings of the Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies, and felt that the allegations contained therein deserved further investigation. Washington's own correspondence with fellow Masons clearly indicate that he was well aware of the subversive forces at work within rival branches of Masonic lodges in Europe, and expressed concern that the curse had spread to the American lodges. Wilgus also writes that Thomas Jefferson was at least somewhat familiar with Weishaupt's work and felt an admiration for him. It appears Jefferson disagreed with Washington's point of view that the Illuminati had infiltrated American Freemasonry. Jefferson believed that such a thing could not possibly happen in America, since our freedom of speech would have made secrecy unnecessary. Obviously, Jefferson was either a member of the Secret Brotherhood, or he was just painfully misguided in his belief, for the Illuminati continues secretly to guide American foreign and domestic policy to this very day. End quote. Hansen's argument is not convincing. It is highly unlikely that the Illuminati were numerous enough to engineer a revolution as early as 1776, as far away as America. Moreover, there is no evidence for any continuity between the 18th century Illuminati and any 20th century American government. Certainly, some American presidents, such as Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, were high ranking Masons, and Roosevelt may have influenced or even decreed the introduction of Masonic symbols on the American dollar bill, including the inscription Novus Ordo Seclorum, and they have may identify this new world order with the universal triumph of the American foreign policy aims at democracy, free trade, and universal human rights, but there was no secrecy or conspiracy about these aims. They were openly proclaimed by Woodrow Wilson in 1919 to George H.W. Bush in 1991. Conspiracy implies a certain malevolence that needs to be hidden from public view. In such a conspiracy in the highest reaches of American power in that period has yet to be demonstrated. But this is not to say that some other organizations, not directly descended from the Illuminati and not necessarily governmental, but having essentially the same conspiratorial aims, may not exist. For conspiracies do exist, and it would be foolish to deny that there may be other non governmental organizations or global cabals with serious dreams of world domination. The Rothschilds and Rockefellers are astonishingly rich, as are other famous globalists such as Bill Gates and George Soros. In the time and writing of 2020, these men, all globalists between them, control a large number of the world's most powerful institutions. One of the institutions is the highly secretive Bilderbergs, founded by a Rothschild ally, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. In June 1991, at the Bilderberg meeting in Baden-Baden, Germany, uh, David Rockefeller said, quote, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises to discretion, our promises that have respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite of world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practice in past centuries." Okay, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to have to get out of here soon, though, unfortunately. I'm going to try to finish this article, and then, oh no, I did not just do that. Oh no. Hold on. Unreal. I just did something really stupid. What did I just do? Oh, hold on a second. Yes. Okay.
Did you read that Scientology article yet?
Hey, you want to do me a favor?
What's up?
Okay, so hold on. I have to go do services, right? And I don't know if you want to do you can say no to this, right? If I sent you this paper, would you read from where I just left off?
I would like to, but I'm hiking down the side of a mountain, and I don't know that I would be the best person to do that at the moment.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut it, and I'll come back and finish that reading. And just for those who, like, I don't know, are impatient and want to read that, I'm gonna drop that into the chat, and it's there. You can read it for yourself. So I appreciate everybody that stopped by, and I appreciate you, man. So take
Yeah,
it
you
easy,
too.
man.
I just don't want to do a bad job while I'm like
No, you're good, man.
my
Cool.
heart
You
rate's
know
up
what
and
I
stuff.
mean?
But
I'll probably come back tomorrow with it or something, because I think
yeah,
that was an interesting article.
Yeah, you're good. And well, I don't. Did you read that Scientology thing yet?
What, that paper you sent me today?
Yeah, not yet, right?
No, I didn't.
No,
So
it's okay.
what?
We'll save it for next time because it goes. I think it'll go well with what you're reading.
Yeah. So what I'll do
So,
is I'll return on the middle of this paper, and then I'll read that next. So okay, thank you, Frey. I appreciate you, and yeah, guys. All right, later.
yeah, bless you, brother. Have fun. Bye.
Yeah.